Hello and welcome to our webinar this afternoon, this morning, this evening, wherever you're calling in from. I'm happy to have you here. We've just got a couple people coming in. Here we go. So what you've come to today is a webinar, Shook Svensson hosted webinar called Burnout Recovery, and we have a guest, Christine O'Neill, who I'll introduce in just a moment. What I first want to do is just say a little bit about this series of webinars that we have, our series of webinars that we've been running this year in 2022. And can you believe it? It's almost halfway through. It's going so quickly. Our series is called Rewiring Workplaces. So we're looking at what's going on in the workplace, what are topics of interest to those who work in organizations or who work on organizations. Sorry, just admitting. So coaches, consultants, you may be interested in these topics as well as anyone in a leadership position or HR or L&D. We're trying to appeal to all of those people. So nothing more to say on that overview of rewiring workplaces. We are recording this both on YouTube and Zoom, by the way, just so you know. So today, burnout recovery. What a hot topic these days. I hear lots about burnout recovery. I see lots of webinars about burnout recovery. And who we have today with us is Christine O'Neill, who has experienced burnout in a couple of ways, both as a medical professional. She knows exactly what burnout is. And as a medical professional working in a very busy world, she has experienced burnout. So we'll be talking about what is burnout, what causes it, and it's not just a simple thing that causes it. So we'll be looking at the intricacies and complexity of what causes burnout, as well as what's going on in the brain. So in our series of what's going on in workplaces, we're always wanting to tie that to the brain and what's happening in our brains. So we'll be tying that to, what causes it, both the external circumstances, even internal circumstances, and what happens to the brain, and then how can we prevent it. So I am going to turn off slides, and Christine and I, it's just the two of us on the screen. Photo, could you spotlight us, please? Or I can do that, actually. There's a Christine spotlight, and there we go. Okay, so Christine, welcome so much. Thank you for being here. What else would you like to say as a way of introducing yourself? I know it was quite a brief overview. I said you're a medical professional and you're a coach and you're a yoga instructor and you do lots of different things. What would you like people to know about you?
Thank you. Well, yeah, first and foremost, I'm a burnout survivor who continues to struggle with the fringes of burnout, because burnout is just such, well, as we'll talk about together.
I'm connected.
Welcome. There are a lot of factors that go into it. And the problem with burnout really is that it's not so much about hoping that we can keep it away in modern life. It's really about dealing with it when it comes up. And this is such a timely topic right now. When I first started doing burnout work, it was back in 2018. Really, people weren't talking about it so much in the general population. It's been long known to be an issue in healthcare and in the caring professions and in education, social work, and adjacent professions. But there's nothing like a global pandemic to throw kerosene on what was already simmering under the surface. And modern life has just become so overwhelming to people. There's just so much volume and velocity coming at us all the time, specifically with the digital presence in our lives. Do you remember what it was like to not have a supercomputer on you at all times? I sort of fantasize about those days. But the truth is that that's the world we're living in now. So it's extra important today to understand what burnout is, how we get there, and more importantly, how we get out of it. Because burnout prevention and burnout recovery are two very different things, and they're often conflated. They're often conflated by companies. The prevention and the recovery, and they're conflated by the popular press, which just does a grave disservice to those of us who are trying to understand what's going on with us and how we can feel better.
Yeah.
And so I've spent the last, I think I had my first burnout experience in 2005, and I have since burnt out, I would say, probably significantly 3 more times in healthcare. Once in leadership after I was promoted into a leadership position in the hospital in which I was practicing, and now as an entrepreneur. The burnout coach burned out. So I am actually currently on a sabbatical from taking on new clients and taking on paid speaking work and workshops, but I couldn't turn Lori down for this opportunity to have a conversation. But taking space, the one quick plug I'll put in for one of the number one interventions when we're feeling overwhelmed or burned out is to create space in our lives. And that can be very difficult to do. I have the privilege of being able to do that as a self-employed person. So,
yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, wow, I hadn't realized, did you say 4 times you've been through?
I would say five, including my entrepreneurial burnout.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Holy cow. That is really a lot. So can you just define for all of us, I think we use the term burnout pretty lightly. Oh, I'm feeling so burnt out today. But burnouts really is much more than just being tired at the end of it or stressed at the end of the day. It's a continual version of that over time, right? Or please give us your definition.
Yeah, no, you're right. The term gets thrown around very casually these days, which is unfortunate because I have come to see in my research, so I'm a medical clinician who uses myself as a laboratory and also, learn a lot from my clients and my colleagues about how they got there and what they're feeling. And so I've done a deep dive into this to really try to parse out, what's the physiologic basis for this, and then what are the external elements that drive it. And so much of it ties into the work that you do in Rewired to Relate, and the whole Rewired series. So that's why I'm extra excited to be having this conversation, because really there's a lot of overlap in the Venn diagram between burnout recovery and Rewired to Relate. So burnout is end stage exhaustion. I've come to consider, and not lightly, burnout as a chronic illness. Yeah. So we need to talk about stress. When we talk about burnout, we need to understand what stress is. So stress is neither good nor bad. It just is. We actually need stress in our lives. I call stress our frenemy. So stress is a good thing in that it motivates us. It gets us out of bed. It gets us, doing what we need to do, caring for the people we need to care for, including ourselves, hopefully, working, going to school, wherever we are in our life stages. Stress is a good thing to a certain extent. And physiologically, as human animals, we're actually very well adapted to manage stress in discrete chunks. So, if you look at evolutionary biology and evolutionary neuroscience, back in the day, we didn't have all these things coming at us all the time. We had a single stressor. We were able to have a stress response rise within us with stress hormones and chemicals that got our body able to manage the stress. And then we were actually able to resolve that physiologic response. Yeah. We no longer have that luxury today. We just have constant stressors coming at us. And it's not necessarily a predator coming at us, causing us to have to run away and hide. It is email from the boss. It is the bills that are piling up on the counter. It is feeling that we're not doing a good enough job at work. at home, as a parent, as a partner, as a daughter, as a friend, and as a coworker. And these stressors build up over time. And
before you just, so they build up, before we go to the build up, I just want to pull apart two different things that you said. There are the emails, sort of the external things that come at us, the emails, the demands, or calendars, and what we're supposed to be showing up for, and all those external things, job description and so on. And then you said our feeling that we're not being good enough.
That's right.
Which is a whole other realm.
A whole other ball of wax, but it's extra important to understand that. And that's a big part of the solution to recovery is understanding which are external drivers, which are internal drivers, determining what we can control and what we can't, and then taking action where we can. So that I'm really happy that you called that out, because that really is the crux of the issue in terms of recovery. So we're designed to work at an optimal level of stress. If we aren't able to manage that stress, and I don't mean that in a judgmental way at all, I simply mean the physiologic process of clearing the stress hormones, finishing the stress cycle, completing it, and then getting back to homeostasis. If we're unable to do that, then we develop a condition called overwhelm, or chronic stress, which can lead to overwhelm, where we have chronically elevated levels of stress hormones like adrenaline, and cortisol, which are the two primary stress hormones that help us manage stress. When those stay elevated, they start to develop, they cause physiologic changes in the brain and in the body that make it harder to manage stress. So you end up in a negative feedback loop, whereby the more stressed you are, the more difficult it is to handle the stress. And the further you get on, really, I consider it a continuum from, individual stressors to burnout. So you have the stressors here, and then you have chronic stress, and then you have overwhelm, where it's starting to be a bit much, but there's still an opportunity to reverse the negative impact. And then finally, you get to burnout, which is a literal collapse, really, of your ability to manage stress. So burnout was officially described by the World Health Organization in 2019 as an occupational phenomenon. So those of us who have been experiencing burnout for decades or talking about burnout for a long time, we're like, oh, thank you, WHO, for giving us an ICD-11 code for this thing that we have long known is a problem. And it's defined by 3 different dimensions, which need to be present in order to qualify for. This is not technically considered a diagnosis, but rather an occupational phenomenon. So physical exhaustion, so feeling just really overwhelmed and tired, and how this manifests is just feeling like you're never rested. You wake up in the morning and you just can't even imagine how you're going to get through your day. You don't want to get out of bed. You just want to pull the covers over your head. So the exhaustion piece is one. The second is feeling a sense of negativity about work. And I'm talking about it specific to work right now, because that's how the WHO defines it. And that's how many workplaces talk about it. And the popular press talks about it. But of course, there are many other drivers outside of work of burnout. So number 2 is feeling very negative. This can manifest as cynicism, severe negativity, and depersonalization. So for instance, when I was experiencing burnout as a clinician, when I was practicing medicine, my compassion meter was at 0. And I started to see my patients, and I'm a highly empathetic and compassionate person. I started to see my patients as problems. So they were no longer Mrs. Smith, who has, chronic high blood pressure and a history of stroke that I'm managing. It was the stroke who doesn't take her medication, right? There was this negativity and depersonalization associated with it. And we see this across all occupational fields. It's not, think about a frontline service worker, a grocery store clerk. I mean, it's easy to see how we can lose sight of our compassion for other people when we're exhausted. We just don't have the ability to do it. And then the third component in the WHO classification is decreased personal and professional efficacy. So our productivity goes down. We aren't getting to our emails. We're not finishing our work on time. And associated with that is this sense that it is never going to get better. There's a sense of hopelessness around it, that you can't see a way out. There's the lack of hope is really what defines this, and the inability to show up the way you used to before you were burned out. So that is really how people are defining it these days. I want to say one thing right now, unless you have another question, about what manifests burnout outside of work. Because the WHO was very specific that it was an occupational phenomenon. But what everybody here on this webinar knows is that there are lots of things that lead us to exhaustion and burnout, primarily caregiver responsibilities. So parental burnout, caregiver burnout, if we're caring for an elderly parent or a partner or child who's ill, volunteering, social justice work, grassroots political advocacy. Anytime we are performing, we're efforting on behalf of others, whether it is compensated with financially or not compensated financially, absolutely it can drive burnout because it's causing the same phenomenon in the body. It's causing stress. Lastly, what I want to say is that one of the big drivers of burnout are societal drivers. So large scale. So if we think about systemic oppression or structural equity, these are drivers of burnout: patriarchy, sexism, racism, white supremacy. So for folks who are living with a lot of isms and archies that impact them on a daily basis, it's all additive. And the thing that tips us over to burnout usually isn't this big major event that happens. It's usually like the final straw. It's that last thing, right? It's trying to turn your computer on to get that email out that you have to get out before the end of the day, and it crashes and your software isn't working and you lose it. That's the thing that we people go scorched earth and like they scream and they throw things and they're like, I'm done, I'm out of here. And they've just reached their limit and their inability to handle things, to manage. We go offline.
Yeah. You used an expression a little bit earlier, end stage. Was it stress or end stage? Do you remember?
Exhaustion.
End stage exhaustion. I think that's that says a lot to me. And you describe those different stages, and end stage exhaustion. I can't do it. Straw's broken. Camel's back is broken. We're at,
So exactly. And a way that I describe this that I think can be helpful is thinking about recovering from feeling stressed. Like at the end of a day, so if you're at baseline and you're not experiencing burnout or chronic overwhelm, and you have a very stressful day, but you actually feel like you did good work, and you come home at the end of the day and it's that good tired, and you go to bed and you wake up and you're refreshed and you're ready to take it on again.
Yeah.
Anybody remember that? Yeah.
Those good old days.
Yeah. When we start to have chronic stress, it might take the full weekend if we work, a Monday through Friday schedule. Think about it like, I'm really like end of day Friday, TGIF. I'm really ready for the weekend. But after a couple of days of space and being away from work, we're feeling refreshed and ready to tackle things again on Monday morning. Once we get to exhaustion, we might need like a full vacation. You might need a week or two going away on holiday to really get back to that place where you're like, okay, I'm back to myself. I can adult again, and I can be a good employee again, or a good leader again. What's different about hitting burnout is that a night of sleep, a weekend of rest, 2 weeks of holiday are not enough. We are talking about long-term physiologic changes, literal structural, measurable changes in the brain and body that unfortunately can take months to years to reverse. So, and I'm going to get on my pedestal for a moment here. So one of the things I hate most about workplace wellness programs and burnout interventions in the workplace is that they are predicated on the idea that very tiny drops of intervention can reverse this process.
Yeah.
And employees know that they don't, because they don't feel any benefit from these things. So it's really important, whether you're an employer, a leader, a policymaker, to understand that, in fact, what is really needed to help is to change the problems, the drivers under your control. So in the workplace, and we know there are 6 major drivers of burnout in the workplace, and you could all name them if we just, did a quick brainstorm, they'd all come up, and even more. But unless we're addressing inadequate resources, too much work for the time allotted, not enough control over one's workday, having a toxic boss, right? Not that an employer can necessarily do a ton about that in the moment, but you know what I'm saying? These are the things that make a difference. Offering one meditation class a week for employees is great, because meditation is really important, or encouraging patients, I flip into patients because of my history, encouraging employees to take up yoga or walk out in nature, all really important things. Inadequate, not enough on their own. Important, not enough on their own.
Yeah, just a real topical bandage. Let's give them a meditation program, and we'll keep whipping them.
Exactly, right. We'll give them all a subscription to Calm or one of those great apps, but it is absolutely a Band-Aid, and it's a checkbox. And the problem is that it doesn't solve the problem. And yes, these problems. So let's talk about a few more of the workplace drivers, if you'd like.
I would. And I'm actually wanting to get a little engagement from the audience. Maybe you guys who are observing, what are the things you've seen that create stress in the workplace? Either you've seen it because you're an employee, or because you are a coach, or because you're somewhere in the organization. What are the things that you see cause stress? Prolonged uncertainty.
Jennifer, that's a really important one. I mean, I haven't even mentioned the pandemic and the global, political unrest, and the collapse of the environment, and just the constant crises that we're dealing with. They contribute to this uncertainty. We're not sure when we're going to come out of this pandemic and when there's going to be economic stability. And that leads right into, the need for certainty that we have, and the need for being able to predict what's happening in the future.
Yeah. So we also have toxic boss and bad management, micromanagement,
right?
Lack of alignment between departments, so big silos and conflict.
Yeah, huge.
Sometimes those are inherent in just the structure of an organization. We need to balance these two things, but if you don't deal with the people things, if the people can't manage that conflict, it just goes toxic.
That's right. One of the kindest things, I don't know if anyone here is a leader, but one of the kindest things we can do is to be clear with people and have those hard conversations. One of the pieces of work that I bring to my work is Brene Brown's Dare to Lead. I'm a certified Dare to Lead professional. And that's really one of the underpinnings, is learning how to have those conversations. If we have leaders in the organization from the top to the ground level, supervisor, manager level, who aren't able to be honest with people, and aren't able to tackle those difficult conversations, and aren't able to provide people with the information they need to forecast even a little bit, it's not going to be good.
Yeah, because things fester.
They fester. And then in the absence of data, we create stories.
Of course.
So that's where you get the rumor mills and that, great dissatisfaction at the ground level, if you will, at the, where people are doing the work and interfacing with the customers or whoever the stakeholders are. And and then an organization is trying to address an engagement issue with a survey, but really it's a leadership issue, right? Giving people, I don't know, dress down Fridays is not going to address the fact that they don't feel like their leadership is being honest with them.
Yeah. It often goes back to leadership.
It sure does.
Personal. Yeah. So were there more that you wanted to bring up? Other stressors?
Well, somebody mentioned lack of alignment between departments. I would also say mismatched values. So between our own personal values and the organizational values, or not upholding the values of the organization, not having the integrity. Like we're seeing our company, its mission statement and its vision and its values posted on the website say one thing, but in fact, we go to work and we see that something else is happening. That feels really terrible when we work at a company like that. Insufficient reward for effort is a huge one. And yes, we're talking monetary, but we're also talking recognition. So just having our peers and our leaders notice our contributions is worth a lot. That's the status piece that actually we all need in order to feel that we are valued in an organization. The lack of control is huge. And I think a moment on work from home and the shutdown and what happened when I used to work in an organization where when we had administrative time where we weren't patient facing, we were expected to be in the office with the door open, fully accessible while we were trying to catch up on our charting and all of our patient phone calls and everything that's accumulated over the week. And once I became a leader in the organization, I advocated for being able to do that from home because having that flexibility and some control over the workday is so valuable to people. And it was shot down time and time again because it was felt that employees weren't trustworthy and they would be out dropping off their dry cleaning or getting a manicure, or I don't know what the thought was, but there was just a lack of trust in the employee. And that's been the case for a lot of organizations. That presence has been required and very important. And of course, that all got blown out of the water. We see that the data is now showing us that working from home is actually extremely efficient for many companies. Unfortunately, it has created an erosion of the work-life boundary for the employees. So for those folks who are either hybrid or totally work from home, another driver of burnout has been just this really permeable day where work is 24/7 and it's impossible to turn it off.
Yeah. Christine, I'm going to share the Be Safe and Certain model.
Yeah.
Because we've been talking around it and I want to bring it to life. I share this often on webinars, but because there's so much we can learn from this model. When these elements, belonging, status, autonomy, fairness, and so on, when these are threatened, the brain generates adrenaline, cortisol, in other words, stress. And this is just what, Christine, you've been talking about. So when we don't have these things in our life and in our workplace, it creates stress. So if we're not feeling like we belong, if we're feeling excluded or rejected, that creates stress. So you were talking about some of those isms. Racism, feeling like we're excluded because of the color of our skin or anything else about our identity that excludes us, or I didn't get the same education as everybody else and they have an in group together and I'm on the out group. All of those things can create a threat to belonging. And there's status. Which side of the pond am I on? That's right. If I don't have trust, that's what you were just saying. If I don't have trust from my workplace, my boss, the leadership, I'm not respected. I don't have the sense that I matter. That creates stress. Autonomy. You were just talking about, the inability to make my own door open, door closed, work from home, work from the office. But, do I have my autonomy? I have to have some kind of autonomy. So micromanagement creates stress. Things being unfair. Man, that's a big one. We get so frustrated when things are not fair. You talked about pay earlier. This person's being paid more than I'm being paid, or I feel like I'm not getting back what I put in. This can feel very unfair, and we want to get revenge when that happens.
Yeah.
And then there's expectations, the mismatch. There was that mismatch of values. There's also mismatch of expectations. If leaders are not having conversations with their people about here's our psychological contract with one another. Here's what I expect from you in the job description. Here's what you expect from me in the workplace. Let's get clear about that. Let's talk about that so we can set realistic, relevant expectations rather than, as you said, if we don't set them, the brain will make them up. And similar for certainty. When there's, a lack of certainty, like we have so much of it in this world. So I just wanted to bring this up because these 6 things are great places to look, whether you're a leader or you're a coach or you're working in L&D or HR and you're wanting to create more sanity in your workplace. these 6 things are a great place to go. They're not the only things, but they do cover a lot of territory. Christine, is there anything you would add? No.
What I will say is, I do a number of things. I'm multi-passionate. But one of my jobs is as an executive leadership coach for C-suite leaders. And this model really resonates with them. I often talk about it with full attribution to Lori, of course, that these are the things that are impacting people. So there's often a very high level sort of view of things without thinking about the impact of these social needs on people. So there's a sense that, well, we're doing everything we can. And I'm like, but are they feeling psychologically safe? And then we talk about, what causes, what helps an employee feel psychologically safe. And it's absolutely addressing these things. So I have found it to be an extraordinarily powerful model and framework to use when, I would say, especially when speaking with people who are very numbers oriented, who are very analytical, because it's a very practical way to help them understand what I'm talking about when I'm talking about how employees feel.
Yeah. Because that world of feelings is a little foreign.
Mushy. Yeah.
Mushy. Yeah.
It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable because it's easier to live in the world of numbers than people. But what is an organization but a group of people? Everything else is just on a computer, right? It's just data on a computer.
And so for them, it's uncomfortable and stress creating.
Very much so. And so, they're human as well. And so they default to the behaviors that allow them to manage and keep going. And that's how the cycle continues. One of the things that I love that Brene Brown says is that as a leader, and she defines leader as anyone. So we're leaders of ourselves, we're leaders of our families, we're leaders of our friend groups, and we're leaders at work. Even if we don't have a titled leadership position, we have an influence over people, an impact on people.
Right.
And what she says is it's imperative, especially the higher you get in leadership, that you understand what your triggers are and what your fears are. Because if you don't understand and attend to them, you risk working out your crap on the people around you. And she uses a curse because she's from Texas. But she's so right. I mean, what is toxic leadership except, someone who doesn't know how to handle their discomfort and what's going on for them. It's a lack of self-awareness often, and a fear. It's most often fear-based.
Yeah. And one of the expressions I use in Rewired to Lead, our leadership program, is about getting your your needs met. Not just dopamine, your needs met at the expense of others.
Yes, same idea.
So if you don't know your needs and your trigger points, and you don't understand yourself as a leader, then you'll take it out on others. At the expense of others, which creates more stress.
Yeah. And so that's actually a really nice segue into talking more about the internal drivers of burnout.
Great.
So, we often think, well, people who burn out are workaholics, but what drives workaholism? It's not enough to say, these are people who just want to work all the time. It's often things like, it's deep psychological issues like perfectionism, the need for high achievement. And often those things are grounded in early life experiences, in the family of origin we came up in the culture that we live in what is valued, what are the messages that we grew up with. These greatly impact how we live as adults, so I prescribe therapy to almost all of my clients if they're not already in therapy, because it's one of the most powerful things we can do is have a trained specialist expert help us tap into what drives us to continue to do these things that contribute to this chronic stress and overwhelm and ultimately burnout for, over 70% of the working population, at least in the US and Canada. I don't know what the statistics are in Europe and the other continents, unfortunately. And I looked for them and I couldn't find them easily. So I wanted to bring those to you. But, I think we all know it's bad. All we need to know is that it's bad. Everybody's feeling very exhausted or burned out. Yeah, it's just a lot of people. We don't have to make the case for it anymore. We all know. Yeah. So perfectionism One of the newer ones that I'm becoming more aware of is neurodiversity. So, when we think of neurodiversity, we think of folks who are on the autism spectrum, who have ADHD, who have learning disorders, or different learning differences, I should say, or who have processing issues. So they don't process language well, or they have auditory processing or sensory processing issues. The world is a lot more intense for these folks, and a lot more challenging depending on what's going on for them, what their difference is. I was just diagnosed with ADHD at age 51, and it explains so much about what drove me and contributed to my burnout over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. So this is where getting professional help when we burn out can be very helpful, because unless we uncover the reasons why we burn out, that we have control over. Again, we can't control necessarily the larger systemic issues, but it is incumbent upon us, if we don't want to live miserable lives, to figure out what we can do for ourselves. And learning that I had ADHD was a really sobering and eye-opening and actually infuriating piece of knowledge that at this point helps me understand how to prevent it moving forward. So those are other things, just the personal differences. So whether it's that our brain works differently, if we have chronic illness, if we are dealing with what we call imposter syndrome, right? So when we're new in a role, often we feel a sense of imposter syndrome because we don't know what we don't know yet. We think we're going to be found out as a fraud. That was a huge driver of my burnout when I was promoted into leadership from an individual contributor position. I had inadequate preparation to go into, I jumped right into a director level cross-organizational role in an 8,000 person organization. And every day I felt like a complete failure and fraud, because I kind of was. I didn't know the lingo. I couldn't read a spreadsheet, a balance sheet. I didn't understand the principles of leadership. Fortunately, I'm a lifelong learner, and I just dove into it and figured it out myself. But for me, certainly feeling like I was never going to be a good enough leader was a problem. And then, especially those of us who are called to work in helping professions or education, there can be something called savior complex, which is something I developed, where you see so much suffering around you and you see so much inadequacy at the systemic level, and you come to feel that you're the only one who can make a difference in people's lives. And that is a very toxic mindset to get into. And it is extraordinarily common.
Yeah. I often use the drama triangle for that, the victim, villain, hero. And anytime we put our hero cape on, man, we're in for it.
We're in for it. But there's never been a time like now to want to feel like a hero, when there's so much that's outside of our control and we're not getting that positive validation. Many of us in the workplace are feeling like we're making a difference. And so we seek that sense of value from where we can find it, because we don't want to feel like we're a failure at life. We want to feel like we're able to do something to make a difference, especially when there's so much that's outside of our control right now.
I think that's what a lot of people are feeling generally in the world right now. Like, okay, I'm a helper type, right? And I want to help. And there's so many things that need help. And how do I do them all? And just thinking about that creates overwhelm in my head.
Yeah, me too.
Where do I start? What can I do? And I have to keep telling myself, okay, I'm going to do my piece. I'm going to do what I can do. And sometimes it's not enough.
And that implies, honestly, Lori, that implies that to me, you're not burnt out yet. Because once we reach burnout, we see all the terrible things, but we no longer have the ability to mount that, it's very early here in the United States where I am. Sorry, I'm losing my words. To be able to rise to the occasion and do something about it. So we lose all of our momentum. We're just like, it's hopeless, right? We get to that hopeless place. Right. So that's when when folks are wondering, they often wonder, well, am I burnt out or not? That's why, I've said this right at the beginning, it comes down to that hope piece. Do you have a sense of hopefulness, and that, you could at least make a difference within your community, within your family, within yourself?
Yeah.
If you no longer feel that way, it's likely that you're burned out or depressed, because there's a lot of similarities between burnout and depression, and often only a professional can help to sort that out. And often they coexist.
Yeah. So I'm just looking at time. This has been a fantastic conversation. I would like to just hear, like, what are the ways to recover? They've kind of been sprinkled in and certainly implied, but what are the things that you go through or have gone through in your phases of recovering from burnout that people should
Well,
know
the first thing
about?
thank you, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, so I didn't do it well because there was no roadmap for me the first few times. So I created one myself. And now, there are a lot more professionals and coaches and healers of all different types talking about burnout recovery. The most important thing to understand is, again, coming back to the fact that there are long-term physiologic changes that have happened in the body. So an approach like learning how to become more productive and handle, getting a new planner and just time blocking is not going to be enough. It's only going to make it worse. And unfortunately, that's one of the big pieces of advice that people talk about, right? Or turning to positive thinking, which often slides into spiritual bypassing and toxic positivity, where we try to just, wish everything away, or it must be happening for a reason. And then we give up our ability often to do something about it. So some of the
hang on one sec before you, sorry to interrupt, but just, you said it earlier and I want to say it, repeat what you said. The things that you can do to help yourself prevent going into burnout are different from the things you need to recover.
They are.
Some of those things that you said, like positive thinking, not the toxic positivity, but some positive thinking, some gratitude, those kind of things can help you on a day-to-day basis stay calm, cool, collected, and support yourself, but they're not the Band-Aid for recovery.
Right. Thank you so much. Yes, I don't mean to dismiss the very positive practices of gratitude journaling, vigorous exercise, spending time with people, doing things that you love, doing exciting things that get you moving and sweating, and spa days, mani-pedis, bubble baths. All of those are great for prevention. They're really important. So, self-care has become a 4-letter word. It's actually 2 4-letter words. Because, those who are really struggling, for whom that level of intervention is no longer enough, feel very dismissed when the advice is to just go get a mani-pedi.
Right.
Like, no, or go do yoga or meditate. It's not going to be enough, because here's what happens once we're burned out. We actually have structural brain changes that are measurable on MRI. So this has been measured. Our prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that is the rational thinking part, that is what in many ways makes us human, actually shrinks in volume when we're burnt out. It was terrifying for me to learn this, that we actually lose brain volume as a result of this chronic stress and the impact of these stress chemicals on our body over time.
Yeah.
The amygdala, which is part of the limbic system, the amygdala that's responsible for fear and rapid response to threats in our environment
and stress,
enlarges. So the volume of the amygdala enlarges. The volume of the PFC, which is the part of the brain that helps to manage the amygdala, shrinks. And so this is the cycle, right? So once you're in that cycle, it's harder to do the things we need to do to get out of burnout. We just don't have the capacity any longer. The good news is these changes are reversible. So once folks have modulated their stress, given themselves what they need, gotten the stress chemicals down, the brain actually goes back to more normal volume ratios. The other impacts, so the hypothalamic pituitary endocrine axis is the very complicated system in the body where the brain sends out chemicals to the organs and target organs and other parts of the body to manage them and monitor them. And this gets very dysregulated. So I consider burnout a condition of dysregulation. So chronic dysregulation, both of the nervous system and of the rest of the physical body. So what we see are chronic changes in, for instance, the digestive system, right? So when we're in chronic stress and burnout, we don't digest as well. And this is because our sympathetic tone, so there are 2 parts of the nervous system, the central nervous system, which is the brain and spinal cord, the autonomic nervous system, which is divided into the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. And these are responsible for handling stress and recovering from stress. So the sympathetic tone is what is increased with the cortisol and adrenaline neurochemicals. And that's what's responsible for our fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses. When we are chronically stressed, and certainly once we're burnt out, we're in constant sympathetic mode. We're constantly as if we're running from a tiger or a bear.
Yeah.
We can't live in this space. The impact on our immune system, it actually decreases our immunity. It decreases the activity of the immune fighting parts of our body, making us more susceptible to illness. It increases our heart rate and blood pressure chronically. It increases our vascular tone. So it contributes to cardiovascular disease, heart attack, and stroke. So these are it's significant. Stress kills. The top 6 reasons that people go to the doctor are stress-related reasons in the US and Canada. So it is folly to think that just meditating a couple of times a week is going to reverse that. It's going to help. It's part of it. But what we need to do is actually take a really broad approach. And when I work, in addition to my executive coaching, I do burnout recovery with clients. And I have broken it into 3 stages. The first stage is basically CPR. It's rescue. It's dealing with the mammalian body. And the first thing we need to do is create space and rest. When I was severely burnt out, the most burnt out I got was in 2018. I had to take a medical leave of absence because I'm just
typing these in the chat box, so you know. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I couldn't function. I thought I was losing my mind. I developed severe anxiety and panic attacks. I tipped into a severe depression. I started to not want to be alive anymore. I didn't have suicidal ideation, but I just couldn't stand feeling this way anymore and feeling like there wasn't a way out of it. And many people have described to me that they get to this place. Once we get to this place, we need professional help. So if you have the ability to quit a job, do it. That requires a lot of levels of privilege, and I understand that. But a lot of folks who are close to retirement will retire. They'll take early retirement, for instance. I really don't mean to dismiss the just quit your job. I mean, it'd be great if we could all do that. Most of us can't, which is why the next 2 stages are really important. But CPR, so rest, creating space, literally getting rest. Sleep is one of the most important things we can prioritize. Unfortunately, it's usually highly dysregulated in burnout. So proper sleep hygiene, obviously well beyond the scope of what we can cover today. This is all available online, everywhere. Proper nutrition and hydration, moving one's body in very gentle ways. When you're in chronic sympathetic overdrive, the last thing your body needs is vigorous exercise. This is not the time to start doing CrossFit or training for a marathon. We're talking gentle walks, preferably in nature, because nature has such a positive impact on our well-being. And connection, social connection. We are hardwired for belonging. It's a big piece of rewired to relate, and it's a big piece of our well-being. We know that loneliness kills. Social connection is critical, but be very careful about who you connect with. Only highly trusted people who love you and care about you and aren't going to judge you for what's going on. So that's really the first part, is literally, it's like SOS. I need to save my brain and my body. Because once we get to burnout, like I said, I consider it a chronic illness. It's not different from dealing with rheumatoid arthritis or lupus or anything like that. We literally need to prioritize 100% our well-being. Otherwise, we're going to crash even more than we already have. And then we're no good to anybody.
Yeah.
Number 2 is taking an inventory of the burnout drivers in your life. So what are the external burnout drivers that are impacting you? What are the impacts of the oppressions on your identity? What's going on at work? Is it a work time mismatch? Do you not have enough resources? Do you have a toxic boss? List all those out. And by the way, those were defined by Christina Maslach, who's one of the biggest researchers, qualitative researchers in burnout, who's been talking about this since the 1970s. So the Maslach burnout inventory is one of the most commonly used tools for assessing burnout. You can find this all online.
I put her name in there. I'm sure I misspelled it.
It's perfect. You got it perfectly.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah. So if you're wondering, okay, which of these workplace impacts are impacting me, take a look at her work and write them all down and see what's going on. And then look at your internal drivers. Do some journaling. I am not a journaler. I really struggle with journaling. So I actually talk into my phone and have it transcribe it, because it's a way for me to do a mental download, get everything out of my head, and then pick out the themes. I give that to a lot of people. Otter AI is an app that is free. They have a free plan, and you can do that. It'll transcribe your thoughts, and it's very helpful. So what are the things, that are coming up for you? Do you have a toxic money story? Most of us have an interesting money story. I came from, I'm first generation American. I immigrated from Canada. I'm a first generation college graduate. There's a lot riding on my success and needing to prove myself, because I wasn't supposed to amount to much. Until I dealt with that, I was destined to burn out over and over again. And even as an entrepreneur, thinking I had to make a certain amount of money to be successful was very toxic for me. Am I a perfectionist, and why? Finding out I had ADHD was a huge part of understanding why I continued to burn out. Things are just, I don't process things the same as other people. Dealing with imposter syndrome, dealing with why we need to achieve. So taking that inventory and getting a sense of, is it predominantly external drivers, predominantly internal drivers, or a combination of both? And for most folks, it's about 50-50. But here's what I'll say. If it's primarily work, you need to buff up your resume. It is very difficult to get a toxic job to work for you. It's going to be a constant trigger. So this is where, if it's all work related or parental caregiver related, we either need to get help, do things differently, or change the environment. Lori, you just published a blog that was really great. Like, what do we do, right? When we're faced with something really challenging, we can accept it, we can try to change it, or we can leave it. And I always come back to those three options. No matter what the circumstance is, those are the only three options you ever have. Try to change it, accept it, or get out of it.
Yeah, and don't accept it if it's toxic.
Don't accept it if it's toxic. That's just guaranteeing it's going to continue to be terrible. We like to think often that we can help make a difference and it'll eventually get better, because it's easier to, because inertia is easier than big changes. Big changes are terrifying. They're not easy. I don't mean to minimize them. But that's where, if we're burnt out, working with a trusted clinician, mental health professional, or a coach can be very, very useful to help sort of sort these things out and figure out where to go. And then the third part is addressing those drivers. So what are the changes that we can make in our life to get out of this? And part of that, so with my clients, one of the first things we do is we redefine success. So most of us have been given a definition of success that is grounded in capitalism and sort of has a certain look to it. And it's highly competitive, and it's firmly grounded in grind and hustle culture. With the wisdom of age and experience, I have learned that, in fact, at the end of the day, that's not how I feel successful. So performing what I call the deathbed exercise can be super helpful in really quickly crystallizing what's important to people, even before we do a values inventory and exercise. Yeah. So, and for those who don't know what this is, imagine you're at the end of your life and you're reflecting back on your life. What will you wish you had done? What will you regret having done or not done? Right. So what are the things that you did that you wish you didn't do? But more importantly, what's the thing that you wish you hadn't done? And for most people, it's they wish they hadn't worked so much.
Yeah. Very few people in that deathbed exercise will say, I wish I spent more time at the office or on my computer.
I wish I got that last promotion and got published in that journal. No, it's about love. It's about connection. It's about feeling like we made a difference and that we had a positive impact, So what are the things that then we use that, and then you reverse engineer? Okay, well, based on that, what's the vision for the rest of my life? And this does get easier the older you get. I will admit it's harder when we're in our 20s or 30s and just beginning our working years, or just beginning our family raising years. It's hard to imagine. We get very caught up. We're exhausted. Life is very busy, and that's where creating space is really necessary to get clear about what's important to us and prioritize differently.
Yeah. So, wow, so much fantastic information, Christine, that I think people can use with themselves to help others use with their colleagues, friends, clients. Thank you so much for that whole piece. I know we could go on. I want to just say a couple of things about our Rewired programs and how they relate to this conversation. Any final, like, sort of punchline sentence? I'll give you another opportunity in about 5 minutes, but I think you want to just...
Yeah, I do actually. I think many of us think of work as our family, those of us who work in organizations or for companies as our family. And there was an Adam Grant tweet a couple of months ago that I thought was so helpful. And it's thinking about work as family is really problematic. It's better to think of work as a community, because if we think about work as family, well, our parents don't fire us because we didn't produce enough. They don't furlough us when times get tough. It's better to think about our work as a community where we work and feel valued, where we feel like we're contributing, that we have some measure of control over the decisions that impact us. And so that might seem a little adjacent to what we were talking about, but as a takeaway, I think it's really important, especially for those of us who end up in a trench mindset. Like, if I take time off, it's going to negatively impact my colleague who is like family, I can't let my work family down. And unfortunately, I don't know what it's like in the UK, but in the US, that's a very strong message that often companies transmit is we're a family. And I think we need to be very careful. Your work is not your family. Your work is not your identity, or at least it shouldn't be. So let's tease those apart.
Great, thank you. That was another powerful statement. So just really briefly, I want to introduce everyone to our Shook-Svensson's Rewired to Lead program. A lot of what we've been talking about today is included in this Rewired to Lead program. It's a comprehensive leadership program which we offer in-house. There are 7 stages to that, the first of which is Rewired to Relate, which Christine knows intimately and was talking about earlier. And then this is just gives you a sense of the scope that we cover in that program. For example, difficult conversations, that is helping leaders and anyone, like you were saying, Christine, anyone can be a leader, helping people have those difficult conversations, because when they don't happen, toxicity festers. In our high-performing cultures and even in motivating your team, we address psychological safety and how do you create that? Also, how do leaders build the ability to hold results as well as positivity and learning, and hold well-being as well. So it's a lot about balancing what the brain needs with what the business needs. So we start with Rewired to Relate. We offer this program publicly, meaning you can take Rewired to Relate to come and find out about this program. We've gotten amazing reviews about what people have learned, and we do cover where stress comes from, just the essence of where stress comes from. We look deeply into the Be Safe and Certain model and how stressors can come from there, but also the needs, because those 6 social needs are things that we need every day, and they are also opportunities to create motivation. So, and you kind of have this balance between motivation and stress. And so how do you have more of the motivation side rather than the stress? So we work on that quite a bit in the Rewired to Relate. It is a virtually offered program. We have all of the content online. So in a 6-week program, actually 5 chapters, you can learn about understanding your brain and how you work better with others. You learn about your emotional brain, how to have the impact you want, how to manage that, and how to manage stress. So it's mostly, the learning happens between the online work that you do about a half hour a week, and then learning conversations that you have in a social learning group. We're social beings. We learn well when we talk to others. So the structure of the program is multifaceted. If you are interested in learning about the program, I offer a webinar called What is Rewired to Relate? There's one in about 6-7 weeks from now. Frode has just put in the chat box a link to that. If you'd like to come and find out more details about that program, please do. Otherwise, we'll see you next month in June. We're working on bringing values to life in an organization, and our guest will be someone who has spent a good part of the last 10 years helping an organization grow quickly and stay really committed to their values. So that is the next one. And I am going to stop sharing here. We're about out of time, but I just want to thank you so much, Christine. I could have listened to you for many more minutes and hours even. And do you have a way that people could contact you?
Yeah. So my website is really the easiest way to reach me. As I said, I'm not currently taking on work, but I hope to get back to working with others at the end of the summer. And it is christineoneal.co is my website. I've just popped it into the chat.
Great. christineoneal.co, so they can contact you and learn more.
They can. I'm also on LinkedIn and on Instagram.
Yeah, so feel free to connect with Christine. It is the end of time. If there's any comments anybody wants to put in the chat box, we're happy to hear them. Thank you all of you over there on YouTube watching this, and if you watch this on a recording and want to connect with us more, please do. Thanks so much.
We didn't even talk about boundaries. We didn't even talk about boundaries. Someone popped that into the chat. That's a huge one. Don't have a gratitude journal, have a resentment journal. That's my final plug. My final tip. If you're feeling exhausted and burned out, figure out where your resentments are. That's where you need to make boundaries.
Well, that's a big part of our internal conversation, isn't it? I have to do everything for everyone, and there goes the boundaries.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This has been such a pleasure, this conversation. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.